It's been a significant change, a real paradigm shift for vessel operators. In recent past, there hasn't been any emission control areas, ECAs, and they could just operate on two different grades of fuel, residual fuel or distillate fuel. Now they have the responsibility to change over to a low sulfur fuel to comply with legislative requirements.
The first ECA fuel we used in January 2005 was diesel oil. So of course, like other ship, we had some problem with leaks.
There are around 50,000 merchant ships on the oceans today, providing a highly cost-effective freight network with a low environmental impact. These environmental credentials are not accidental. The International Maritime Organization drafted MarPol Annex 6, which imposed strict limits on emissions of sulfur oxides and particulate matter from ships. In this series, we examine the impact these emission control regulations have had on the use and management of marine fuel and lubricants, and how ExxonMobil has risen to the challenge in developing new ECA-compliant products that fit with today's greener objectives. In addition to developing lower sulfur fuels, MarPol has put in place emission control areas, ECAs, designated zones with a strict limit on engine exhaust gases. Since January 2015, vessels operating in an ECA must ensure that the sulfur does not exceed 0.10%. In Europe, the ECA extends from the Baltic to the North Sea and English Channel, while the North America ECA covers approximately 200 miles off the entire US and Canadian coasts, with future ECAs expected in the Mediterranean, Asia, Pacific, and elsewhere. The sulfur cap for vessels operating outside an ECA is currently limited to 3.5%. However, a cut to this figure is due from 2020, which will bring the limit down to 0.5%. These reductions have presented a major challenge for ship operators and their engineers.
We had some problem with the temperature of the diesel oil because this ship was not designed to burn diesel oil all the time, because the viscosity changed from 13 centistock to 0 centistock. We have a lot of leak, losing a lot of diesel oil, about 1,000 liters a day, instead of 1,000 liters a week for heavy fuel oil.
Yves Lejeune's experience was typical of what many operators were facing when the new regulations came into force. But this was before ExxonMobil had developed the solutions we see today. However, having access to ECA-compliant fuel is only part of the story.
There's legislative requirements that require vessel operators to comply. There's fines, there's been vessel arrests where vessels have been seized, but also, if you look at the bigger picture, the vessel operator would be, deemed as not a green compliant operating company. To some operators, that's very, very important, as well as their particular customers.
The default choice for most is to switch to a fuel that meets the sulfur cap. The most common alternative is marine gas oil, MGO, a low-sulfur distillate fuel. However, as we've heard, for engines designed for burning heavy fuel oil, this can raise serious issues. ExxonMobil has developed a special ECA fuel category that not only complies with the legislation, it also retains many of the essential operational characteristics of HFO. The category currently includes ExxonMobil Premium HCME 50 and ExxonMobil Premium AFME 200, which are both available in Northwest Europe.
After we changed for AFME 200 from Exxon, and the problem disappears because we find again the same viscosity of 13 centistock on the engine. So the leak disappeared. We were running as before with heavy fuel oil.
The fuel suppliers has to ensure that we can provide the vessels the correct fuel. The ship owners and operators need to ensure that they can manage it properly on board. And we all play a role to ensure that we help the environment and comply with the local legislation and global legislation.
In this first program of the series, we've seen how environmental legislation is changing the marine landscape and how operators and engineers are having to respond to some tough challenges. We've outlined IMO MarPol Annex 6 legislation for lower sulfur emissions, identified existing and future eco zones, learnt of the early difficulties of changing to low sulfur fuels, and flagged up the ExxonMobil premium eco category fuels. In the next program in the series, Eco Fuels Summary, we'll look at a range of options available.